Welcome to CJ's Chat Box. I have a special guest today. He's special in a couple of different ways. One way that he's special is that I followed him home one day because I had been playing golf and I was turning left into gate 5 and the car in front of me on its license plate had Peace Corps 1977, and I thought, oh my goodness sake, this would be an interesting guy to interview. So I followed him home. Luckily, he didn't live far from where I live. And I stopped him, and he got out of the car, and I said, hey, I've been following you. And he said, really? So I introduced myself and told him who I was. So we made an appointment to get together and talk to him at his home, because he does live here in the village, and his name is Jim Quigley. So welcome, Jim Quigley.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, I loved, and of course we will get to the Peace Corps part, because I just think that that's something that in some way, I know you did mention a friend of yours that their daughter had joined, but it seems almost like it's not in the news anymore. It's not something that young people, before they go to college or whatever, that they think about doing that, because it's such a wonderful way to travel and to also help other people. But let's go back to the beginning, because you are not a native. You are from?
Well, I was born in New York.
Upstate.
Upstate, yeah.
Yes. So you're very used to cold.
Yeah, that's where I grew up.
And snow.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did tell me that, well, when we started talking about the fact, because I'm from Minnesota, so the snow part and the cold part, but you were a young man, a young boy, so you did all the things you would do in snow.
We made snowmen and snow fortresses, had snowball fights, and we'd finally go home when our feet were too numb to move.
Oh, did you makeshift something to slide down hills?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because not everybody had sleds.
Yeah, well, we had a hill in the middle of our street, and it was the most popular place for all the kids on a snowy day.
Yes, but it's like kickball in the city.
Yeah, I grew up in a wonderful little town. It was very child-friendly place to grow up.
Wonderful. Wasn't it fairly small town?
It's called Haverstraw, New York. It's about 40 miles north of New York City on the west side of the Hudson River.
Okay. And you said you had some siblings?
2 sisters, 2 brothers.
Okay. And they live back in the Midwest, or?
One in Florida, one in Ohio, a sister, both sisters in Illinois.
Okay, so they have scattered around a little bit. And I found it interesting that your dad was a pastor, you said, which, given how, that was a while ago, we are not boomers. Well, you are probably a boomer, though.
I was born in 1948.
Okay. But being the son of a pastor in a small community doesn't mean that you have lots and lots of money to spend on things. And so you told me that because of that, I mean, when you're young, you don't even know you're poor. Or anyway, you said that your dad, because he has a very interesting story as well, which we can't talk about, but you did tell me about him, and the fact that because of his circumstances, he had been raised in an orphanage, so he knew about doing without and so on. And that one of the things you learned from your dad was to be very creative and imaginative and save everything, make things. I remember you told me, what did he ask you to do about the nails?
Oh, well, he was very resourceful. He had to be resourceful. And I learned how to straighten nails with a hammer when I was probably about 7 years old. And we'd pull nails. But the one thing we did was to put a new floor in our dining room and living room in the house that was owned by the church. And as a pastor, one of the things that was part of his arrangement was that they provided a house for he and his family. It was a big house. It was a wonderful house. And he would pinch pennies for the upkeep of the house.
Right.
And one thing we did one day was to pull nails out of an oak floor, and we used these crowbars, and the nails would bend when you pulled them out.
Sure.
And we're not going to throw away nails. So he showed us how to take a hammer and straighten them. So we spent hours straightening nails, and that was sort of the beginning. There were all sorts of things we did to
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, and that's why I like starting at the beginning, is that some of those things that sound now so like, dad had me do that. But later on in life, when you go do what you do, all the lessons you learn about being resourceful, creative, and imaginative from your father, you used much later, and you've never not used them. I mean, it's just come second nature to you.
Yeah.
So that part, the other thing that you did when you were young, which is also, even though in the woods here we do have somebody that rides his bike and delivers the paper, but that's kind of a dying art as well, to have a newspaper boy.
A newspaper delivery.
Yeah, you did that.
Yeah, it's a shame. The readership of American newspapers has fallen dramatically, in large part because people get their news electronically on the internet.
Right.
But newspaper readership is down. And there have been hundreds of metropolitan dailies that have closed. And when I was a boy, I delivered over time. I delivered several different newspapers through my boyhood, and that was a way to earn money.
Yes.
And it was especially wonderful at the holidays because you'd go around knocking on doors to collect for the subscription for your route, and people would give you a Christmas tip, which I loved. That was great.
Yeah. Well, again, that's something that we don't hear much about anymore, but that was so much part of America, was the paper boy. Yeah. And again, when you think about where you were living in that cold weather, you got it, rain or snow, you got your paper. Because everybody...
Well, the first newspaper I delivered was in Rockland County, New York, and that was in the 1950s. And then into the 1960s, in junior high school and high school, I delivered the Meadville Tribune in Pennsylvania, and then the Cleveland Press and the Cleveland Plain Dealer when I lived in Cleveland Heights. Yeah. And it was on that November day in 1963 when they sent us home from school. They told us the president had been assassinated.
Oh my goodness.
And they sent us home.
Well, they didn't know what was going to happen.
Well, so later that day, I went to the normal street corner where I would go to get my bundle of newspapers that was dropped off for me. And there was another boy who would come to get his bundle, and we waited and waited, and it got dark. And we both agreed, they must have stopped the presses. There was going to be an edition that evening. We knew it, so we waited. And finally, there it was, the headline, Kennedy assassinated. And there were people waiting on their porches for us to deliver the newspaper. People stopped their cars in the street asking to buy a newspaper. We said, we only have enough for our paper route.
Yeah. Well, and you think about the fact that I remember that distinctly because I was in the hospital after my son was born, but the fact that everybody watched it on television forever and ever and ever, but the fact that people still preferred their paper to be able to read it.
That had all the detail.
Yes, all the details that they would have there. And so again, that is, the things that you remember, and also because you said you lived here and then you lived there, is that because your father was a pastor, you did move fairly, not often, but you did move around a little bit because he got, he got a new call from a different church. Yeah. And was that hard for you then, or did you just adjust? You had a brother, so maybe that wasn't...
4 siblings. And we missed the kids that we made friends with when we moved away. And my parents advised us, you will always make new friends wherever you go. And that, of course, has proven itself to be true throughout my life. You always make new friends wherever you go.
And one of the things that you shared that, again, we could do a whole thing on your dad because he was an interesting man. But one of the things that I find interesting that I think is carried through from him to you and even into your son, but the fact that he, because of his time that he had spent in an orphanage, he had this really heart to help others. And therefore he got very involved in civil service. And even to the point, as you said, with protests. He was one of the protesters as well. Yeah. Did he lay down and get arrested or any of that stuff?
Well, actually, he was involved in an arrest one day. He was a member of the Council on Racial Equality in Cleveland, Ohio, and it was a group of other clergymen and black and white, and they were concerned about the fair hiring practices of the city of Cleveland. There were precious few people of color in the police force or in the fire department, and they were concerned about affirmative action. Before it was called affirmative action, they wanted more equal hiring practices by the city. And they thought it was important to go express their view about that to the mayor of the city of Cleveland, Ralph Locher, at the time.
Okay.
And they made an appointment. They went to the appointment. They waited in the office and waited and waited and waited. And finally, the mayor's secretary said, "His Honor, the mayor's very sorry, but he'll be unable to meet with you today, and we offer our regrets." And so they made another appointment, and they came back for that other appointment. Same thing.
Oh, my
After
goodness.
waiting at length, His Honor the Mayor just won't have time to see you today. And they came back a third time.
Wow.
And they decided that if they were told that line again, they weren't leaving. And they didn't leave. They were told that line again. So they said, "We're not leaving." And eventually, as the offices closed for business for the day, the police came in and put them in handcuffs and took them away.
Oh.
So they were arrested for trespassing.
Oh my goodness.
But it made the front page of the newspaper. So I'm delivering the newspaper, and I'm delivering the newspaper with my father's picture on the front page of him being arrested for a sit-in protest. And I thought, way to go, Dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But see, that to me also gives, watching and being young and observing that and absorbing it as well, has to do with how you do what you do and did what you did. I find that interesting, but that he had such a heart for that it just never stopped, because in fact,
he was committed to that. He was dedicated to that throughout his professional
and did
life.
he meet and work with Carl Stokes at one point in time?
Actually,
as well?
yes. He was very active in the campaign, along with many other of the people who were involved in those organizations. But he was very active in the campaign to get Carl Stokes elected mayor of Cleveland. And he was very well acquainted with the African American community in Cleveland and beyond. So as a boy who grew up in a almost completely white neighborhood, it was unusual. It was unique. It was different for us when we started having black friends because of the people my father knew.
Okay. But in the neighborhoods or the churches, your father was the preacher, was that mainly white, or was that mixed?
It was all white. It was
all white.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although in the little town where I grew up, in the elementary school, there were maybe a fourth of the kids in the class were African American. We had some Hispanic kids, a few Asian kids. It was integrated. The public school was integrated.
Yeah. So you moved around quite a bit, and it did sound like he, was more, I think you made, and I don't know if it was his term or yours, but it was more deed than creed.
That was his notion.
That was his term, yes. That he really, it's like what we do is more important.
For him, it was much more important. Your actions speak louder than your words.
Yeah. And again, the reason I'm bringing up his background and how it affected you, because I think that, and I don't know where did you end up graduating from high school? Because
well, I graduated in 1966 from Cleveland Heights High School.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved right away to Los Angeles, California. And I started college at LA Valley College in Van Nuys.
Okay. So was that, and did you get, did you finish there or go somebody else to get your, did you just kind of spot?
I didn't want much to do with school at the time.
Okay, yeah.
That
was kind of a change.
It was. I attended classes for about 3 weeks, and I said, "I'm leaving." I went back to Ohio.
You did.
Yeah.
So you were by yourself.
I had friends. I had friends and
but
siblings.
Did you have a job then? Back in
No,
Ohio?
I got a job. Well, jobs were so easy to get back then.
They are now too. Just nobody wants to work.
Well, I got a union job.
Really?
I saw an ad in the newspaper at Cleveland Press, an ad for a trainee, machinist trainee. Well, that sounds pretty good. I'll go do that. And I worked for what was the largest manufacturer in the world of aircraft landing gear.
Oh my
It's
heavens
called the
sakes.
Cleveland Pneumatic Tool Company. And most of the aircraft you see landing at this airport or that are going to have landing gear made by the Cleveland Pneumatic Tool Company. So I ran an internal grinding machine, and I got union wages, and I had a lot of money in my pocket.
Wow. Now here again, it's like that was not what you'd been taught. So it sounds like also you get a job in the union, they teach you how to do this.
Yes.
So therefore, you catch on quickly, and I think again.
I could say it was a quick study. I picked it up very
because
fast. Yeah.
Again, I go back to give Dad some of that credit because of the fact he taught you guys and you followed the rules. So teaching you something about being a machinist and so on.
But I got bored with it.
Well,
I got bored with it, and I was my parents kept persuading me. We live a quarter mile from a college. Why don't you come out and you can live with us and go to college?
Yeah.
And eventually, that's what I did.
You did give it another try. What did you major in then?
At first, it was just
The general ed.
general studies.
Yeah.
But later, I went into social work and then into international relations.
Yeah. But did you get a degree in social work?
I did.
Because you said, and I don't know if that's where you practiced, was back in the Midwest again?
I did. I was back in Cleveland, and
Okay.
after a year of doing social work, I realized I wasn't cut out to be a social worker. It was too heartbreaking.
Yes, yeah.
And that's when I started wandering around, and I joined the Peace Corps.
Before the Peace Corps, though, you did VISTA.
I was a VISTA volunteer. Yeah,
And I don't know enough about VISTA, and that's the one thing I wanted you to talk, because it did lead you into Peace Corps.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what did VISTA? What did you do with
Well,
them?
VISTA, VISTA, is Volunteers in Service to America. It was under the federal government, and the federal government had this umbrella agency called Action. It included the Peace Corps and VISTA, and I think it was called SCORE, Senior Corps of Retired Executives. There were a number of other
That's still going
federal
on,
volunteer. I don't know if that's still around, but it was it started in the Kennedy administration. And ironically, that year I worked as a recruiter for the Peace Corps after I came back from the Peace Corps. There was the 20th anniversary of the Peace Corps in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay.
And it was on the steps of the Union, Michigan, the Michigan Union building in Ann Arbor, where Kennedy, as then a candidate for the presidency, had just finished his second debate with Richard Nixon.
That would be.
And so he went to Ann Arbor, and the story was, there he was in Ann Arbor, and it was late, and he wanted to get some rest, and he was going to sleep that night in that building, and there were a bunch of college students milling around outside. And somebody finally said to him, "You better go out there. You got all these kids out there, and they want to see you."
Yeah.
So he was a bit combative. He was tired and cranky, and he came out and he stood on the steps and, "How many of you, studying this, or how would you be willing to go here or go to here and do that?" And so he launched the Peace Corps idea. Even though the truth is that originally it was Hubert Humphrey's idea, but Kennedy seized on it, and he popularized it. And of course, when he became president, he created the Peace Corps, and then appointed his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, to direct it.
Right. Well, again, and just hearing about the one that's more centered in America, the VISTA, is helping. But the SCORE, which I think I heard someone mention that that's still out there.
Okay.
Because to me, that is something that, I meet a lot of people here in the village that are retired that think, what do I do now? I have no purpose.
It's a great idea.
And it's tapping the skills and the talents and the knowledge you have.
Yeah.
And because it's still of use. But
how many small businesses need some help in accounting? Or how many small businesses could you need some help in marketing? Or how many small businesses could be better managed? Right. And so some of these retired executives who have that experience, they can help guide some of these businesses. There's
treasures in this village that haven't been excavated. And I think that bringing that up about SCORE is something we should really either publicize more or talk about a little bit more. But because then you had found out you couldn't do social work because their heart was breaking every time these kids that you had to deal with, and then doing some with the VISTA for a bit, then you kind of stumbled upon a guy that you used to work with, and that was how you got into
I told you the story about how I had wandered out to San Francisco. I was living in Cleveland, Ohio.
Again.
And I wandered out to San Francisco. And I was on the campus at Berkeley, and I saw the Berkeley newspaper, the Berkeley Barb.
Okay.
And full page ad in there for Peace Corps recruiters at their career planning and placement office.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that looks interesting. Let me walk in and see what's that about. And I meet this guy who was a fellow former Vista volunteer. He was in Chicago. I was in Cleveland. I got acquainted with him. And he says, "Hey, Quigley, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, what's going on with the Peace Corps? Where are you sending people these days?" And he said, "Well, where do you want to go?" And I said, "Someplace warm." And he put this loose leaf binder. He opened up this loose leaf binder, and he said, and he leafed through it, and he says, "Hey, how about there?" And it was a place called Chuuk in Micronesia in the Central Pacific.
Okay.
And that sounds pretty good. I'll go there. So I stayed there for 3 years.
Yes, but a little bit, you didn't know anything about this island, right, before that?
Well, all I knew about it was that it was somewhere out there,
Warm.
this tiny little place in the Central Pacific near the equator.
Yeah. And when you first, again, you didn't know, did you know a lot of the specifics as to how small the village was or the island?
Well, that was, you see, that's one of the beauties of the Peace Corps, is that the Peace Corps sends people where they are invited. So that any government in the world which would like to have, it's typically their third world countries, developing countries,
right.
That would like to have some skilled people. Animal husbandry, agriculture, forestry, nursing, teaching math, teaching science, teaching English, engineering, business. There's a whole series of skills, and Peace Corps wants people with those skills, and they want them to have a commitment of 2 years and to go someplace and learn their language and learn their customs and not get paid a whole lot of money for it.
No. You're doing it
but
as a
but
service.
it's what's nice. Unlike when I was in the Peace Corps, today they get much more money today, and also during your 2 years of service, you accumulate what's called a readjustment allowance. So when you come back, you got a little stash of money to get started when you come back.
Yeah. I think that, again, what intrigues me is the fact that, first of all, the idea that countries contact the Peace Corps saying, we really could use some help here to train us to do this or to teach us to do that. And so having that kind of resourcefulness that you have grown up with, straightening out nails. You weren't going to be doing that there probably.
Well, the point I wanted to make was that Peace Corps has an excellent training program. So when you enter, you spend the first 3 days with orientation and inoculations and getting your passport and that sort of thing. And then when you're in country, you get usually 6 weeks of training. So you get an introduction to the local customs and culture, so you don't commit faux pas and offend people because you don't understand the culture and the customs. And you get some instruction on their history and their political systems, and then instruction on language. But Peace Corps looks for, if you're going to a Spanish-speaking country, they prefer you already know how to speak Spanish.
Right.
Or if you're going to French West Africa, that you can speak French.
What did they speak at this?
Well, where I went, they spoke Kapas and Chuk.
That's just rolls off my tongue. Yeah.
That's not something that they teach at any American college, but there were excellent instructors, and the best instructors I found as a Peace Corps volunteer were the children.
Oh,
I met this Catholic priest who spoke fluent Kapas because he could give a sermon in Kapas, and he was much beloved.
Oh,
he was much beloved.
Thanks.
And he said to me one day, because he knew I was struggling with the language, he said, "You want to learn how to speak this language? Talk to the children, because the children, the adults, you'll mangle the grammar and they'll look at each other. What do you say? What do you say? The children will just laugh at you."
Oh.
It's like, that's not how the children. That's not how you say it. You say it this way. So you listen to the kids, and the kids teach you how to speak the language.
Yeah. Now the people when you go to 6 weeks training, are there former Peace Corps workers, or are there people from the village that are training you how to do what you do there?
Both.
Okay.
Both. There are typically, you'll have in-service Peace Corps volunteers who've already had 2 years or more there. And then there are the local instructors, people who are fluent in English, because they're going to be speaking with a largely English crowd, but also understand the culture.
Did the priest, was he just a permanent, he came in, he lived there and stayed there?
Yeah. It's like you go anywhere in the world and you're going to find missionaries anywhere in the world. And so they were Jesuits, mostly from New York.
Oh, really?
New York Jesuits living out in Micronesia. And a wonderful bunch. Really,
Oh.
in fact, I'm not religious.
Okay.
I'm an agnostic.
Okay.
But I really respect what religion means for people, and I really respected these guys. The Catholics had the finest educational system in all of Micronesia. Their graduates routinely go on to leadership in positions in government, in business, and some of them leave and go off to far-flung places.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that you talked about was the fact that you were only supposed to be there 2 years, as agreed with the Peace Corps. And again, because of your ability to become so resourceful and struggling with the language, all that. But then you started to work on projects with them.
Yeah. I got better at the language, and I understood what people really wanted. And
but then again, being there, living with the people, seeing what it was they needed, and because you're resourceful, you could say, we could do this, or about that. Yeah. So then you took on a project that you realized you couldn't finish.
Well, there was, in one respect, I got lucky.
Okay.
So I was in the district center. You'd think about a place like Truk Islands, part of Micronesia, and you've got just hundreds of little islands.
Okay.
And then you've got the main island, the main they typically call that the district center. So I'm at the district center one day, and this journalist who had come in on there was one flight per day. One flight would come in from the west one day, and then it would arrive the following day and head back east. So it was Continental Airlines, Micronesia Airlines.
Okay.
And this journalist who introduced himself from the Los Angeles Times he wanted to write a story about Peace Corps volunteers. So he sat me down and interviewed me, and I ended up in his story, which was syndicated.
Okay.
And it appeared in newspapers all across the United States, including the International Herald Tribune. So one of the readers of that newspaper story was this guy named Edwin Broderick. I still remember his name. He was the bishop who was the executive director of Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities in New York. And he read about I wanted to build a windmill so I could freeze fish and market the fish to the district center from this little island. And he liked that idea, and completely unsolicited. I never heard from the guy. Suddenly I get this thing in the mail, I open it up, and there's a check for $5,000.
Oh my, that's a lot.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of money. It's like, okay, well, hey, I'd go take a vacation down in Tahiti or someplace. No, I deposited the money in the bank, and I formed a committee, and we discussed what we're going to do, how we're going to invest this money, and what we're going to buy. So we decided we're going to build the structure, we're going to put up a windmill, we're going to try to have it drive a freezer to keep fish frozen so they could be marketed in the district center, because there was a market for fish.
Right.
And people had a lot of fish out of the
Right, but you had to make sure it was good.
Yeah, you had to, typically they would dry fish, so you get salt fish.
Oh yeah.
Salt fish it's not as desirable as fresh fish.
Right.
So if you have frozen, you're gonna sell it better.
Well, and again, that's the part that I just see that strain of that you're very alert to watch and see, and to be so resourceful again as to this is what would really help you. But you just didn't throw them out there. You taught them how, and you helped them do it by that guy.
Honestly,
sends you the money.
Honestly, and I think probably a majority of former Peace Corps volunteers would say the same thing. I learned a whole lot more from them than I ever taught in return.
Oh.
I go there, we typically have this notion, we're Americans, we're great at everything, we know all this stuff, and you soon disabuse yourself of that, and you learn how ignorant you are. I learned how ignorant I was. I didn't know about their culture and their customs. They were very patient. They were so patient. They brought me along, and finally I became to appreciate what it was that they needed, and listen. I became a better listener. Once I could speak the language, I could be a better listener.
And then you could formulate what it is.
Yeah.
How was it adjusting to the food part of the culture?
Oh, that was fun.
Was it all fish, or was it?
That was all sorts of tropical stuff.
Oh, okay.
A lot of stuff you get from the sea, and especially they go out for tuna.
Oh, okay.
They take their boats out. Some of them would use sailing boats. Some would use motorboats. But if you saw a flock of seabirds feasting off the surface of the water, well, they're going after the smaller fish that are driven to the surface by the bigger fish, the tuna. And so when they'd see that, well, tuna.
That's where we go.
And they'd go straight through with their trolling, and they'd bring in these tuna, big tuna. And they'd carry them. One man might carry 2 fish by their gills. Put their hands up into the gills and they carry the fish. And one fish could feed like 4 families. I mean,
my stars. But it all sounds like really healthy stuff too.
Oh yeah.
With the tropical stuff and then the fresh fish all the time.
Yeah, well, their agriculture was fairly limited by the quality of the soil, highly porous soil.
Okay.
And the water, think of an atoll.
Yeah.
I was on an atoll, which is basically an undersea mountaintop that's got some growth on top of it. And so the maximum elevation above sea level on that island I was on was about 12 feet.
Really?
12 feet, that's all, 12 feet above sea level. So when it rained, the rain would permeate through the porous soil, and then you ever watch rain fall on the ocean? Did you see a raindrop a drop of rain will sit on top of salt water until it dissipates.
Oh, okay.
And so a large body of fresh water sitting on this brackish salt water is called a water lens. So on an outer island, you can dig down until when you get water, it's going to be fairly fresh. The deeper you go, the more brackish it is. But so the fresh water
on the top
floats on the salt water. And what's happening in those islands all around the world is that rising sea level is displacing the water lens, meaning that their agriculture is compromised, meaning that a lot of these folks are going to have to flee. They're going to have to abandon their islands because of rising sea level. And it is happening now. It's been happening for years, and it's getting worse every year.
Yeah, and you know, I know we can't go. I'd like to just sit and talk about what you did there on the island and all that kind of thing, because again, learning to understand and appreciate a different culture. But because of, again, experiencing that is what's happening to that water lens, and then now that when you came back after your 3 years, for some reason you all of a sudden got very academic and started going back and getting doctorates and all of those things, and they're in that environmental realm. So again, I just see
it was just fun. I was thirsty. I came back and I got a job with the federal government as a recruiter for the Peace Corps, and I traveled all over the states of Ohio and Michigan. I went to dozens of college campuses talking to students about the Peace Corps. And after going to all these campuses, I just, you know what, I think I'd like to go back and get another degree. So I got I got 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and I got into academia.
Right.
I was doing research in environmental issues.
And you met some very interesting people in that field.
Yeah.
And I know that your father had also worked for the Central Ethics, or he was involved with that, or was that with you?
Well, no, that was his career. I was. By the time he had already retired when I got into my line of work.
But you were exposed to some really important, I mean, I'm not familiar with that field, so I don't recognize some of the names that you...
Well, I was doing my dissertation research at the University of Pennsylvania, and I learned about the Delaware Valley Toxics Coalition, which was opposed to the construction of a mass burn trash incinerator in the city of Philadelphia. And I got involved with them, and I agreed with them. I ran the numbers. Anybody could have run the numbers, and you could see that economically, it made more sense to recycle that material than to burn it. Environmentally, it made more sense to recycle that material than to burn it. So I was at a public hearing at the City Hall. There was standing room only that day, and I gave my little 3-minute spiel, and one of the staff members of Barry Commoner from the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems at Queens College was there that day. He heard what I had to say. After I got done, he tapped me on the shoulder, he handed me his business card, he said, "We'd like to talk to you." So I I called, and I got invited to go up to the center in New York, and I spent a day there. And before I left, Barry Commoner said, we'd like to offer you a job.
Oh, my goodness.
So I worked there for 7 years. And I learned more math and science and economics there than anything I had learned in my previous academic career.
You know what's interesting also is that when you're not ready, which you weren't when you were at the LA college and so on and so forth, but when you are ready, you just, because you catch on to things, you learn quickly, and when you're ready for that to be absorbed, as you said, in 7 years you learn more than that, never.
Yeah, there's always this element of being in the right place at the right time, which is just
definitely.
dumb luck. But there's also the issue of if you're prepared, sometimes the dumb luck is just what you needed, because your dumb luck then opens the door to something that you're already prepared for.
But you never backed away from anything either. You just said, not for me right now with school, but other things kind of like, wow, that sounds kind of fun. Maybe I'll try that. You were always open to trying something new and different. And I know that you have one son that's, what, 30-something?
Well, tomorrow is his 31st birthday.
Oh, wow. And he lives...
He's in Cleveland, Ohio.
There is something magical about Cleveland for
Well,
you.
yeah,
I gather that.
Very formative years for me.
Yes. But, when you told me what he did, what he does, and he works with, I think, the homeless or...
Well, he helps indigent people find housing.
Oh. Okay.
And it's a very gratifying job for him. He really loves it.
Yeah. But see, there again, I just see your father and you and now your son. I don't know, was he around your father at all?
Oh, yeah, he was acquainted with my father.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
again,
how these traits, these talents, these skills, that you watch somebody do it and you pick it up without even realizing that, I'll be able to use this someday to help others.
Yeah.
And that you have done that. And you're now still more in the environmental, the economics, and so on, because don't you teach a class every so often at UCI?
Well, I came here to retire.
Oh yeah, well
I came here to retire, and after being here a few years, I got a little restless with just the leisure activity, and I saw that University of California at Irvine has a program, and it's a master's in urban and regional planning. And they wanted somebody to teach a course there. And I thought, I could do that. Yeah. So I sent my CV, and I got an interview, and they said, okay, why don't you teach this course for us? So I'm going to start that in about 5 weeks.
Wonderful. Well, again, to me, it's passing on, because as you said, you're retired, but you have got all of that experience. And to be able to teach it to younger people, college age, I'm already, my mind is going 1,000 miles a minute, because once you start doing that, you would be also real helpful in making the village aware of SCORE.
Well, I don't know if SCORE still exists.
I think it is. I think I heard
Senior
Carmen
Corps of Retired Executives. If it's not around, I'll be surprised.
Yeah, it should be around, and that would be so helpful if somebody was speaking about it, promoting it, because I've run into too many people here that just absolutely feel they have no worth. What am I getting up for?
Yeah.
And there is so much need for that. The other thing that impresses me about VISTA, Peace Corps, and SCORE is that it was driven by the government, and happily so, because right now we just take pot shots at everything they do. But the fact that they did do some really wonderful things, but have they died, or can they be resuscitated? Especially Peace Corps, I know it's still there, but I think if you're going to promote that to recruit people, going to college, it's a little late, because when they're in college, they're thinking about how much money they're going to make when they get their degree.
Yeah. Well,
if you go to younger kids in 5th and 6th grade and let them know this is an opportunity that you could do, you can decide where you'd like to go and see the world before you settle down with a job and a family. That's where you should really start talking, is elementary schools, junior, middle school. That would be, to me, I would think the teachers would be ecstatic about that, because it's not only an adventure for them, but a giving back, a being of service. We don't promote that very well either, helping others. We're always about what's in it for me.
My mother had 2 brothers. They're both gone now. 2 brothers who were in the United States Marine Corps, and they were in the Pacific during the Second World War.
Oh.
And it's amazing that either of them lived.
Right.
And then one of them, after being in the Pacific, was sent to Korea to fight in Korea.
Oh,
and he was in one of the bloodiest battles in Korea, the Chosan Reservoir, and he survived that.
Wow.
My father had two brothers, one in the Navy and one in the Army. My father had a heart murmur, and they told him that he couldn't serve. But I had, and then subsequent to that, I've had in-laws and cousins who have been in the armed forces, and that is a form of community service where you put your life on the line.
On the line.
You're prepared to sacrifice your life. The Peace Corps, it doesn't really ask you to sacrifice your life, although there have been Peace Corps volunteers who've died in service from various things, although it's not like the casualty rates of the armed forces.
No.
But the thing is that we have this tradition of service, whether it's the armed services or volunteer services, and I'm sure throughout Laguna Woods Village, you've got all sorts. Look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're doing this just on your own free time to spread word around about who lives in the village.
Yes. And it is fulfilling and satisfying, and I enjoy it immensely. I guess with the military, we know the service and so on is just that as Peace Corps, I guess, because you said too, it was not there because I wasn't a religious person, but I still knew how to serve and help. So many times, unless you become a missionary, you never think about going abroad to other countries, third world countries and everything. But the opportunity is still there with the Peace Corps. So anyway, I appreciate so much visiting with me today.
Happy to be here.
And sharing your story. And of course, it never ends because there's always something else you're going to be getting into with what you're going to be doing now at UCI. And, with your son.
I'm glad you followed me home that day, Constance. I'm happy to make your acquaintance. Thank you very much.
It probably won't stop, but I mean, that is, I wasn't desperate, but I'm alert and I see what's going on around me. And if I see something or hear about somebody that might be interesting to interview,
and now
I'm there.
And now I know that if I encounter some people who I think might be good interviewees for you, I'll let you know.
I need to network like that. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.